having a really wonderful time here in Vancouver and with you all, although I can only see the first three of you here right now. So I want to thank you for that, but especially for the relief I felt when, after watching the Republican debate on the airplane, we landed in Vancouver. Okay. I grew up in Austin, Texas, and after I graduated from high school there, I took a break from my academic career and went to Washington, D.C. to intern for Senator Mark Dayton. He's now the governor of Minnesota. I learned a lot from Mark, who insisted that everyone in his office call him by his first name because he knew all of ours, even the interns. Where other interns on the Hill met their bosses maybe once in their internship just to take a photo before their last day, I actually went with Mark at least twice to lunch in the Senate dining room. Mark Dayton also paid his interns hourly for the work that we were doing, which is pretty much unheard of. Yes, he had the financial resources to do so, but Mark was motivated in his treatment of us and the paychecks he wrote by his belief that the work that we were doing contributed in an imperative way to the work that he was doing representing his constituents from Minnesota. He knew that our work, reading the mail, was worthwhile, valuable, and therefore worth paying for. He paid for his values. After my semester in Washington, D.C., I did a gap year program in Israel, and then I went to university at Scripps College in Claremont, California. When I first arrived at Scripps, I felt lost. I didn't really know what to do with myself, so I turned to something that had always been enjoyable for me, baking. I find the action of putting the ingredients together and mixing to be very meditative. The results you get to share with people, and then they like you, so you're popular. And I like cookies and all the other stuff, so that's a perk. So having just returned from Israel, I started baking challah in my dorm kitchen, and random people showed up to learn from me after smelling it down the hall. Within a month, we had a good handful of regular bakers coming back week after week and complaining that their friends were eating all of their challah. So as any good Econ 101 student would, I recognized demand, not just for the finished product of the challah bread, but also for the opportunity to actively participate in baking the challah. And I thought that we should use that energy for something good. So we went to the campus dining hall kitchen, which served 1,000 meals a day, and asked them, hey, can a bunch of teenagers come use your kitchen sometimes? And they were having temporary insanity and said yes. And we started baking 50 or 100 loaves every week and selling them in a main courtyard on campus and donating the money. And pretty soon, Challah for Hunger was a staple at the Claremont colleges. I do want to say that campus now, which I think is actually one of closer to 90, not 70, like Eric said, we've always growing. They sell between 250 and 300 loaves of challah every week on that campus. So rewind back to the very beginning, not current, but very beginning, and then fast forward 2 years later when, during my senior year, President Clinton spoke on campus. I convinced people that I should go to the VIP reception before his speech, and I worked all that out the day of the event. So I spent the hour right before the event started in a computer closet in my dorm, making a really ugly brochure about Challah for Hunger that I could hand to President Clinton. I also had a beautiful loaf of challah that I wrapped in tinfoil, which is not the most elegant of food packaging options. So my friend and I went to this event, and they had a photo line there, the kind where the star stands in one place and everybody lines up and you pop into the photo and then they click the camera and someone yanks you out the other side to make room for the next person, like a fast assembly line. And they keep it moving because they have a table before you can go into the photo area. They have a table where you put down everything that's in your hands. That way you aren't taking off your jacket and putting down your drink and wasting everyone's time when they're ready to shoot the photo. So my friend and I went to the end of the line, and I had her stand strategically to block the fact that I was attempting to smuggle in a foil package to President Clinton. We were successful, and I handed him all of this stuff, including a really ugly brochure that I had made in less than an hour, and took the photo. We went on our way. What I imagine happened next, the last person in line behind us was the president of our college, and she had attended law school with the Clintons. So in my imagination, after we were gone, he turned to her and asked, Nancy, what is wrong with your students? Why did they throw bread at me? I wasn't there for that. I had gone on my way. A month later, I graduated, and I went to Europe to do some traveling. And the next thing I knew, I was checking my email one day, and I had a message whose subject was President Clinton. I was like, okay. I didn't think it was spam because this was a new email address, so no one had it yet. So I clicked on the message, and it basically said, wants to talk to you. So I flipped out and closed my email and went to the Eiffel Tower. And then I came back the next day and forwarded the message to my dad, who responded immediately saying, that guy called the house looking for you yesterday. Write back to him. So I did. I wrote back, and I was like, okay, cool. But I'm in Europe right now, and I'll be back in a few months. Should we reconnect then? And the guy wrote, Ellie, where are you? We'll call you tomorrow at this time. What's the number? So the next day, I left my tour at, where was I? Notre Dame. I left my tour at Notre Dame early, and I went to the house. And it was actually really lucky because the rest of my trip, I was staying in hostels. But in Paris, I happened to stay with someone who decades earlier was a French exchange student living in LA with my grandmother. So I was staying at his house, and I could use his family phone. Otherwise, if I had been staying in a hostel, I would have had to talk to President Clinton from a payphone. I didn't have a phone with me on that trip in the good old days. So I was at the phone, and it rang, and the guy on the other end said, Ellie, this is Justin. Will you hold for President Clinton? And I've never been good at negotiating, so I was just like, yeah, I'll hold. So President Clinton quickly came on and asked, Ellie, where the heck are you? And I said I was in Paris, and he said, oh, I was there when I was your age. And then he corrected himself and said he was actually there the following spring. I was there right after graduating from undergrad, and he went to Oxford after he graduated from undergrad, and on his spring break, he went to Paris. So he compared our timelines exactly, which was it was exciting and a little bit of pressure, and now means I really need to hustle. And then he asked where I was going next, and I told him I was going to Croatia, and he enthusiastically responded that he'd been there. Not rhetorically, I'm really asking, what do you do when someone says that they've been somewhere that you're going and they're excited about it? Yeah, you ask for recommendations, is that what someone said? Yeah, so like, oh, well, cool. What hostel should I stay in, Mr. President? And he actually responded, well, Ellie, I was there twice when I was president. So I wasn't doing the tourist thing. So we moved on from that embarrassing moment, and as Eric mentioned, he was working on a book called Giving, How Each of Us Can Change the World, and he wanted to write about Challah for Hunger. And I don't remember what he asked that prompted me. Wait, stop, I always forget this part of the story. Okay, I want to go back to my original approach to President Clinton with my ugly, suspicious foil package. I don't think I would have the chutzpah to do that today. I would be worried about the propriety of giving a loaf of bread to a former president, and especially about how suspicious it would look and if the Secret Service would tackle me. And I wouldn't want to give an ugly brochure. And I would think, like, who am I to try to give anything to a president? But back then, I didn't even know to worry about those things, and it actually worked out pretty well. So from that, I learned to prepare for success so you don't end up printing a really ugly brochure because the folder with the high-res photos is buried under layer and layer of your desktop. Prepare for success, but don't worry about the unknown. Don't let that or what you're unprepared for stop you. In fact, one of the values of being inexperienced is that you don't know what's impossible, so you just go for it. And that led me to a phone call with President Clinton where he asked something, I don't know what it was, and I responded and said something about using your purchasing power for good. And he said, that is a great line, and then repeated it back the way one does when taking notes. And that brings me back to what I learned from Mark Dayton about acting out your values, both in your actions and the way you spend your money. What do we as Jews value? The Talmud says that the Torah starts with chesed and ends with chesed, commonly translated as loving kindness, acts of kindness that are motivated by love. The good news is that Judaism actually cares much more about what we do than about how we think or feel, so you don't actually have to love everybody. You just have to act like you do. And what do you value? How do your actions show what you value? How does your money and the way you spend it in the world help create a world that shares your values? What do you say and think you value? And what do your behaviors and spending habits actually demonstrate that you value? Fair wages or scoring deals? The future of our environment or convenience? We live in a stunningly complex world, and these values often clash. In fact, it's really hard to work on bettering the world without causing some harm, because to work on the world, we have to live in it. The good news is that Judaism has an answer for this in the imperative that it's not up to you to finish. There's no way that any one of us, or maybe even all of us together, will solve world hunger, although I hope we will. But we can't make it perfect. But that doesn't mean that you're free to turn away from the work. I will never be able to live in total alignment with all of my values, with everything working out perfectly, but that doesn't mean that I shouldn't strive every day to be good and then to be better. Thank you.